right, good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to congratulate every single one of you to be here today. I know you have full-time jobs for most of you. You're volunteers, you're coaches, you're volunteer coaches. So I think it's very important for you for what you do as a volunteer in hockey. So let's start this morning with a good round of applause for all of you guys. So, perfect. So as you can see, English is my first language. My translator bailed on me, so I'll try to do my best not to make any mistakes. Whoops, sorry. I'll turn that off. Not to make any mistakes this morning. So out of curiosity, how many of you knows the SDRCC, which stands for the Sport Dispute Resolution Center of Canada? Raise your hand high in pride. No? Perfect. That's usually a good thing. That means you were not involved in any sports-related disputes. So I'll give you a bit of information about us. So this morning's session, we have about an hour. It will be a short presentation on the SDRCC. What are the main causes of disputes in the sports system and some strategies to prevent them? Then we'll entertain some scenarios throughout these causes, and I'll entertain some questions at the end. All right, so SDRCC, where do we come from? Well, at the end of 1990, early 2000, the Minister of Sport at the time was receiving phone calls from athletes, coaches, sport federations saying, well, my rights have not been respected. I've been wrongfully denied my place on the national team. I don't want to go to courts because it's going to take 5 years. What am I supposed to do? So we put together a working group, and they came up with this problem statement, which is due to a lack of fair and consistent policies or to the improper administration of those policies, athletes and other participants in sport are being disciplined, harassed, and denied opportunities without proper recourse to a hearing or appeal. So basically, it took about 4 years. Then they created the SDRCC through a federal act. So we're a statutory organization of the federal government. We're 100% funded by Sport Canada, not for profit. We offer our two big mandates are prevention and resolution of sports disputes. Prevention is what I'm doing here today, so workshops, presentations. We have multiple educational material that is free to download on our website, and we also do resolution. So we offer mediation and arbitration. Does that ring a bell for anybody? Yes? All right, perfect. Mainly to the national sport system, so national team athletes and national team coaches and federations. We have 50, I'm sorry, there's a mistake. We have 50 professional arbitrators and mediators on our roster, which are appointed on a rotational basis. And we offer our services across Canada in both official languages. And we're also the anti-doping tribunal in Canada. So whenever there's an athlete that gets tested positive, there's a adverse anti-doping rule violation, this athlete has a right to a hearing, and it comes to the SDRCC. We do about 50 to 55 cases a year in general. There's a little tendency to increase, so we're not going out of business anytime soon, fortunately or unfortunately. And this year, if the trend continues, it's going to be one of our record years. Although Pyeongchang was last year, we had a couple cases regarding team selection, but this year it's looking up to be quite busy. Out of these 50 to 55 cases, we have what we call doping offenses and ordinary appeals. About 43% are doping related. For the rest, which I said we call ordinary disputes, about a quarter of them are team selection issues. About a quarter of all our disputes are team selection issues, so that's our bread and butter, and also carding. So whenever an athlete gets athlete assistant program for Sport Canada, and there's a challenge regarding the nomination of the carding, then it comes to us as well. And then an increasing number of disputes is our governance issues, which I'll be talking about today during the presentation a bit more. I'll skip through that one. I mentioned that if you go to regular courts, it can take up to 5 years to get your case heard. We're a bit faster than that at the SDRCC. If you look at let's say for team selection issues, we're averaging 10 to 15 days now to get the issue resolved. So just quite a bit faster than the courts. Doping issues are from a month to 2 months to get resolved, and other types of issues are spiking depending on different years. Sorry, I just want to. I'm missing a slide. Oh, okay. Okay. I'm sorry. That was not expected. If I talk about alternative dispute resolution, does that ring a bell to any one of you in the room? Yes? No? Not all at the same time? Yeah? Perfect. All right, so if we had a big spectrum from your right to my left, from your right to, anyway, no, it's okay, from left to right, yeah? Let's say on this end of the spectrum, let's do it that way. On this end of the spectrum, you'd have trials, right? So trials are, if any of you is familiar with the television show Suits, then this is what you see. Lawyers going to court and stuff like that, so it's pretty costly, it takes a long time to resolve. Then, a bit closer to us mere citizens, you have administrative hearings, so that would be your small claim courts. And then, towards the bit closer to the middle, this is what we call the alternative dispute resolution spectrum. This is where you'd have arbitration. So that's the first service that we offer to athletes and coaches. Arbitration is just like going to the regular courts, it's just the process is way more flexible and there's less formality, less complexity, and it's free of charge for athletes, for national athletes as well to be on this, to take on this service. But what we're really focusing on at the SDRCC is mediation. So whenever there's a case and people want to go to arbitration, we ask them to do mediation for a little amount of 3 hours for them to try to amicably settle the dispute. So, and this is where I get to the next slide. By imposing mediation on people, which is usually a voluntary process between parties, we see that we have about about 50 to 60% every year of amicable settlements. So what that means is it preserves relationships, it's less costly, it takes less time to resolve as well, and in the end, it's beneficial for everyone because it's a win-win in the end. So we're aiming towards having more and more mediation and less arbitration in the upcoming future. And through this, just to give you a quick example, there was an athlete, he filed an appeal to the SDRCC, he didn't receive his carding, and then we asked them to do a mediation, and because usually they go through an internal appeal, but the federation didn't have time. So when they got to the mediation session at the SDRCC, federation said, hey, we got our funding cut by half, so this is, last year we had 12 cards to hand out, now we only have 6. That information was never communicated to the athlete. So when the athlete said, well, I didn't know that, so then he withdrew his appeal. So that's some sort of settlement between the parties. So this is where we get to about 60% a year. So in our prevention mandates, we have a kiosk as well that go to different conferences and events. If you're hosting an event in your region and you would like the SDRCC to hand out some promotional stuff and also educational material, feel free to contact us. And we also do consultation on policy drafting. So if you're in the process of renewing your governance structure, you're trying to implement a new policy in your organization, whether it's a code of conduct, or an appeal policy per se, you can ask the SDRCC. That's a free of charge service. That's a service free of charge. But it's depending on staff time if we're available to help you out with that. And we're not lawyers, so we're not going to give you legal advice on this policy, but we can definitely give you some feedback to highlight some gaps and inconsistencies between your governance structure. Some of the other topics that we entertain, rights and responsibilities, negotiation skills, which we'll talk about this afternoon, team selection, discipline processes, and so on. I didn't lose you all so far? No? Good. Some of the publications that we have are on your table right now. You can download every single one of them on our website for free in both official languages again, and we also have some interactive modules, online for you to use. Okay. Main cause of disputes and prevention strategies. So there's a book on your table. I would like you not to open it right now because all the answers are in this booklet. So just wait about an hour and then you can read it as much as you want. With the conferences that we do, the cases that are brought to the SDRCC, we highlighted 5 of the main causes of disputes between athletes, their coaches, and their federation. And we used best management practices to build prevention strategies around that to try to answer these cause of disputes. By the end of the session, I'll probably be repeating myself because some of the prevention strategies can be used for more than one cause of dispute. But I'll try to explain them with different examples. If I talk about the rules of natural justice, does that ring a bell for everyone? Yes? No? Perfect. All right. So rules of natural justice, it's due process. Everyone has a right to be heard. Everyone has a right to a fair hearing. So just to give you a little example for that, let's say there's a coach who, your parents, right? In your life, you're not just volunteers, but your parents. You might have kids that are also playing hockey. Am I right? Yes, for the most part. Thank you. All right. So let's say a coach makes a decision about your kid, and you're not happy with that. So you go to the administrators of your club, and there's an appeal policy, and the appeal policy says you need to file an appeal to contest the decision of that coach, right? As any of you as coaches, was there any of your decision overturned, or someone tried to overturn one of your decisions? Yes, thank you very much, sir. For I'll give you a hockey puck after we have one just for that. Perfect. So then the parents, they file the appeal, then they send it to the administrators. The administrators, they read that carefully and diligently, and then they say, okay, so we're going to convene an appeal panel to hear this case and see if we need to overturn or not the decision of the coach. So then these people gather around, they read the appeal, and then they decide that, yes, the decision of the coach needs to be overturned. And then they convene, in a separate meeting, they convene the coach to say, hey, by the way, the decision that you made was overturned, and here are the reasons why. Then the coaches claims, well, you guys didn't follow due process because I was never aware that someone was trying to challenge my decision. He was never able to present his case or to present his side of the stories. What the appeal panel did was only take the arguments of the parents. So everyone has the right to be heard. Everyone has the right to make their case. So what does that say? In order for and the coach felt injustice in the end because he was never able to present his side of the story. So basically, in order for people not to be perceiving an injustice, in your governance structure, either your team selection policy or that may be something that you're more working on a day-to-day basis. If you're selecting a team to go, let's say, to the regional championship or go to the Canada Games, let's say, you need to have clear and well-funded, fair and transparent decision-making process. So it's very important to be open and transparent. So your process needs to be, the process that you do, let's say for your team selection policy, it needs to be as open and transparent. It's not something that you do shadily in your office and then you put it in front of everyone saying, haha, here's the policy. And you need to be able to share those policies and criteria as much as you can, right? So people need to be aware of what their requirements are, what they need to be following in order for them to make the team. If people are not aware of that, then they cannot prepare properly or they cannot, have a discussion with you regarding whether or not they could be on a team. You need to make sure that they're also easily accessible. Nowadays with internet, there's no reason for you not to be able to share those policies and criteria. Used to be that it was it was posted on the door of the coach in his office. But nowadays with internet, you need to be able to share those things with your parents. Because in the end, the decisions that you make, they have a direct impact on your athletes and on your organization as a whole. So it's very important for you to share that as much as possible. Let's say you're amending your policy, right? You said that you needed to, in order for you to make the team, you needed to go to 3 training camps, and then you're eligible to be on a team. Well, if one of the camps get canceled and you need to amend your policy, that also needs to be communicated to your stakeholders as much as possible. Because in the end, every time there's a lack of transparency in your policies, there's a chance for people to raise their hand and saying, well, this is not going to work out, and I'll be challenging your decision. Because the higher transparency you have in your decision-making process, as general, I'm using the team selection as an example, but the higher the transparency of your organization, the more people will buy into your decision-making process, right? So the more people will feel comfortable, engaging in the process, and then their sentiment, their feeling of trust and fairness towards the process will be increased as well. In your policies, let's say you're writing, I'll use the team selection again. In your policy, you need to use clear and simple languages, simple language. The kids that you're coaching, they're not lawyers. I'm assuming most of us are not lawyers either, so it's really important for you to use clear and simple language as much as possible. Ensure decisions are based on facts. Based on facts you need to clear the room left for discretion. And I want you to do a little exercise with you this morning. I want you to think about your definition of, in order for you to understand, how to clear the room for discretion, I want you to think about leadership. Everyone in your mind, just tell yourself your definition of leadership. And I would like you to share your definition closely with the person next to you for just about 20 seconds. Not all at the same time. People have similarities in their definition of leadership, but none of you have the exact same definition. And this is where clarifying the room for discretion means is that, if you're saying, well, that athlete has to show leadership in order to be on my team, but if you're not defining what leadership means to you, then that athlete cannot, rest his case or show that what your intention of leadership. So this is where it's important for, clarify the room left for discretion. You need to make the gray areas as black and white as possible. And also explain the roles and responsibilities of each members, right? So in your team selection policy, again, maybe the coach will be making a first cut, but that needs to be approved by, let's say, the head coach of your organization, and ultimately maybe be stamped by the board of directors. So that needs to be outlined as well in your policies. Every members of your organizations need to know their roles in order to know what's expected of them. And also give enough time for them to appeal, right? So if you're saying I'll make, in your policy again, if you're saying I'll make the selection at midnight the day before we leave for the tournament, that doesn't leave much time for people to appeal your decision. I'm using an extreme example. I know that's not what's happening in real life, but you need to let people enough time to ask questions about your selection process and that they feel that they're involved and engaged. So your decision-making authority is more respected. To prevent the feeling of injustice by any of your stakeholders or your athletes, or coaches, you need to respect the principles of natural justice that I talked about in the scenario earlier. First of all, there are numerous principles of natural justice, but the two main ones that are applicable to the sports system in our reality is the right to be heard, right? So timely. Whenever you're allowing people to appeal one of your decisions in your appeal policy, it needs to be timely. So do not cause any prejudice. So the example that I just talked about by saying, I'll be making my final decision at midnight before the day before we leave. That can cause prejudice to maybe the athlete that was on the cutoff line and would like to at least understand why he didn't get the team. So if he has no time to at least entertain a discussion with you regarding why he didn't make the team, he can have a sense of injustice. which goes along with the adequate notice about the notice of complaint. People have a right to know what, let's say in a discipline process, if you're disciplining one of your coaches according to your code of conduct, that is really important. That coach has a right to know what's alleged against him. What are the accusations against him? What's the clause of the code of conduct that he didn't properly followed? People, just like in the example, the coach was never asked to present his side of the case. People have a right to be able to attend or be represented at a hearing. That is very important if we're dealing with minors as well. Minors are not cannot be convened to any sort of discipline committee or to an appeal by themselves. They have to be represented by at least their parent, legal guardian, a lawyer of some sort. But that's important. And yeah, so as long as they have the right to refute a complaint, submit proof and arguments, and present witnesses if necessary, right? People have a right to make a case and try to make their side of the story heard. Why is that important? Because let's say if you're at a club level and there's an appeal of your decision, that can maybe, I didn't see Hockey Manitoba's appeal policy, but maybe they could hear a case to, as an, let's say, appeal your appeal as a second instance. And then courts of judges of regular courts or arbitrators at the SDRCC, for instance, will overturn decisions if due process, principles of natural justice were not properly followed. All right. Second one is impartiality, and this will bring us to the second cause of dispute. But decisions must be made by individuals who are free from conflict of interest, which I'll talk about in a second. And decision must take into consideration all the evidence provided, right? So again, I'm going back to the example of the coach that could never present his case. The appeal panel only heard the parent side of the story. So it's important for both sides to be heard. To help you a bit with that, if you're not, has any of you ever sit on a discipline committee, let's say, or an appeal committee? Yes? No? Maybe? You? Perfect. Thank you very much, sir, for helping me. All right, so we developed a interactive module online at the SDRCC. It's free of charge again. It's interactive and it's in both official languages. You go through 5 units, basically how to write a decision, how to manage a hearing, how to deal with the human factor. You know, every single step of a process, of an appeal process, whether it be discipline or challenge of your selection policy, just to give you a bit more tools to. In order to conduct those processes properly. It takes about 40 minutes to go through this whole thing. All right, second cause of dispute. All right, so just to put that into context, the example I'll be using is, your parents, you have kids that play hockey, you're a tightly knit group, tightly knitted or tightly knit, I'm not sure. As I mentioned, my translator stayed back in Montreal. So and you run into the coach of one of your kids at the supermarket, and then you talk about the last season and how great it went and how your kid was wonderful because he scored 25 goals and blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the conversation, the coach says, well, by the way, my contract was not renewed for next year. And he said, when I asked the administrators of the club why they didn't renew my contract, their reasons were shady, and it seems to me that it was unjust, and I didn't get a proper explanation for that. So then the parents, then after a couple days afterwards, the parents of that club, they gathered together for a barbecue. And talking to one another about the fact that the coach is not going to come back next year. One of them says, well, he was in a relationship with the head coach of our club, and I've heard that it ended bitterly at the end of the last season. So do any of you see something weird in this situation? No? Maybe the fact that maybe the coach contract didn't get renewed because the relationship ended bitterly with the head coach. So maybe she or he said, I'm not going to renew his contract because I hate that person. I don't want to see him again. So I'll bring my personal life into our professional life and not renew his contract. So another main cause of dispute that we see in the sports system is decision makers that are in conflict of interest. And that, I don't want to surprise anyone, but the smaller the organization, the higher the risk of conflict of interest, right? Because since you're great people, you will be wearing different hats. You will be parenting, you will be a parent, you will be a coach, and you may end up being an administrator to a club. So by wearing those several hats, because you're that good, you're more prone to be in a conflict of interest in the end, because you have to deal with many aspects of your organization. In order to be able to tackle these conflict of interest, you need to have a clear and well-written policy on conflict of interest, on what's the process that you're going to use to deal with those conflicts of interest. And this is where the second brochure that I brought comes in handy. We developed a guide with the help of the International Bar Association. They put out conflict of interest rules for their arbitrators, and we adapted that to the sport lingo. Just, good questions to ask yourself whenever you think you're in a conflict of interest, whether it be real, potential, or perceived. And then there's a flowchart on the other side of the brochure that you can hang on the wall of your office for you to, just a little roadmap for you to have questions when you think you're in such a situation. What are some of the situations that can be prone for you to be prone to a conflict of interest? Well, when you have coached or you're coaching an athlete in question, should you be making a decision regarding an athlete? If you're coaching a kid, maybe you're not maybe if your kid is coaching, if you're coaching your kid, that's what I wanted to say. Maybe you're not the best person, the best unbiased person to make a decision whether or not your kid should make the team, right? When you're having voiced an opinion on a similar question, when you have a family member, involved in the decision, and that could be also, there could be, when I talked about real, potential, or perceived conflict of interest, some conflicts of interest, you have to live with some conflict of interest. The smaller the organization, the higher the risk for conflicts, as I mentioned, but sometimes you just don't have enough people to have independent decision makers. So let's say you're renewing the contract for the jerseys of your team. You ask 3 bidders, and the lowest bidder happens to be your cousin. And you with other administrators of your club gather together, review the request for proposal, and then your cousin ends up being the lowest bidder, but he meets all the requirements for the contract, and he's the best person to make the jerseys for your team. That's a perceived conflict of interest because he's your family member, but in the end, if the process was properly followed, if the attribution of the contract was properly followed, then you can carry on with that perceived conflict of interest because the process was properly followed. So, as I mentioned, you need to have a clear policy on conflicts of interest. How to deal with that more easily? You need to have control mechanisms of approval involving several individuals. So major decisions need the approval of higher authorities. So let's say you're selecting your team and your kid is playing on your team. You may not be the one making that decision. Maybe you want to defer that decision making to, let's say, the head coach of your club, maybe a panel of 2 or 3 different coaches, or maybe ultimately the administrators of your club, because the smarter the organization, there's more interaction between the people. So whenever you feel like you're not fit to make a decision, maybe your process should say that you should divulge that. You should divert that decision making to to a higher authority. Because in the end, if you have clear and well-written policies and you use simple language and you've clarified the room for discretion, anyone could be making the exact same decision as you. So the better your policies are, the easier it will be to be making that decision. Also, it could be a really good thing for you every year, maybe, when you renew your contract, to say to have a small sheet of declaration of interest. Am I involved in another club? Am I an administrator in another club? Just so that people in your surroundings are aware in your organization that, you know, if anything comes up, then we know that John Doe here should not be on the appeal panel for XYZ because he's involved with this organization. Maybe there's a potential for conflict of interest there. At the SDRCC, just to give you an example, I'll check at the time. We ask, before every single case, we ask arbitrators to declare a conflict, right? So a couple years back, we had a case. The arbitrator, she was a female. She read the name of the parties, and then she was kind of, you know, uneasy because she said, well, I had an affair with one of the counsels during law school. So by our process at the SDRCC is to share that declaration of interest to all the parties and to see whether or not they feel that that person should stay as the arbitrator. So when we shared that declaration, the counsel had no objection because he didn't recall having an affair with her during law school, right? So maybe it was the wrong guy, or maybe it wasn't that good. I don't know, but yeah. And also, yeah. All right, now you're laughing. Perfect. Decisions can be made by a group of people rather than just an individual. It's way harder for people to argue that there was bias if the decision was made by more than one person, right? So whenever the more people you can have into a decision making, the better it is to avoid the appearance of bias. So as I mentioned, your decisions need to be compliant with your policies and rules. Decisions have to, decisions have to be the same no matter who decided. So and also justified by facts. So if you're the more subjectivity you have in your team selection, again, sorry, that's the only example I have in my mind this morning, the higher the risk for people to challenge your decision. But if you make it on objective, the most objective aspects possible, then there's less chance for people to challenge your decision. And just think about the leadership exercise that we did 5 minutes ago. Yeah. All right. What are we looking on time? Perfect. Third cause of dispute. All right. So the example I'll be using is there's you've all been to an annual general meeting for your club or for the Hockey Manitoba, I assume. All right, so let's say there's Mr. Robert, who's a very enthusiastic and engaged member in your organization. And there are three, he's already on the board, he's the president of the board, and there are 3 spots left. No one really wants to be on that because the time commitment is very important, and they don't want to have to deal with all the appeals and blah, blah, blah. But feeling guilty, Mrs. Roberts, his wife, says, well, I'll run for the board. She's enthusiastic, saying that she'll be able to keep an eye on her husband, so that's a really good thing. And so she gets on the board by acclamation. A couple months afterwards, there's a discipline committee that gathers for an alleged harassment allegation regarding a coach. Mr. and Mrs. Roberts end up being on that discipline committee, and they make the decision to sanction the coach. They followed due process and everything, but in the end, they decide to sanction the coach and to expel him from the organization. A couple days after, the coach in question sends an email to the board of directors saying, your sanction is not valid because according to your bylaws, the board of directors, the organization's bylaws, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to have both parents of an athlete on the team. You're not, on the board of directors. You're not allowed to have two people, a wife and a husband in this case, on the board of directors. So he's saying that their sanction is invalid. And so what does that tell us is that decision makers, unfortunately, sometimes they're unfamiliar with policy or they're misinterpreting it. I'm sure Mrs. Roberts had the best intentions in the world to give her time for that organization, but ultimately, since no one read their bylaws, no one knew that she was not able to be on that board of directors. But the thing is, what about the coach? Maybe the coach knew that all along. Maybe he read the bylaws the first day that he got into that organization, but he kept that from them until it suited him, right? Until he needed that to his advantage. But what does that tell us? That tells us that you need to have some sort of training, some sort of onboarding. Whenever you bring new people into your organization, it's very important for them to know every single rules and policies that apply to them, because otherwise you kind of waive your right to object. If, for instance, in this case, we would have asked every single board members to sign the bylaws after they get elected. Well, yeah, anyway, it might not work, but you kind of buy into the process, so you waived your right to object afterwards. So it's not appropriate for the coach to wait after the discipline committee rules in order to wave that in their face and saying, ha ha ha, your decision is invalid. So basically, it's all about managing human resources. Your training of volunteers helps greatly to reduce the risks of people making decisions without authority, as I mentioned. You just don't give the document. Whenever you're bringing a new person into your organization, what we usually do is, hey, here's the coach's handbook, and read it and try to apply it as much as you can. You need to have some sort of training, buy-in process. At the end, maybe with the existing coaches of your organization, the board of director, I don't know, you need to explain everything that's applicable to them and have some sort of buying process, right? It's way harder for people to object when they sign at the bottom of the document than when they say that, oh yeah, I did read the document, and they move on. Make sure they know and they understand their role in the organization as well. Maybe Mrs. Roberts, maybe she could have stayed as a board member but not sit on the exact same discipline panel as her husband. So that way it would have been beneficial for the organization, have more volunteers involved, but at the same time respecting their bylaws and due process in disciplining the coach, and also avoiding conflict of interest as well, because you don't know, maybe the coach was rude to one of their kids, and since there are two parents on the same board, they're going to stick it to him by expelling him from the organization. So yeah, when they ensure the roles and responsibilities, also, let's say for who here in this room are administrators, board members, or yes, a lot of people? Perfect. Has any of you ever had, let's say, an onboarding or a finance 101 or how to run a meeting 101 within your organization? Or yes? Shy, but yes? Okay. So that could be something that you bring up next time is, hey guys, what about we do a session on how to read financial reports 101 or how to manage a meeting. And I'm sure in your local communities there are tons of resources to help you with that. There are tons of resources online as well, but within your communities, I'm sure you can find someone who's going to be willing to either help you or donate his time to help the organization to have better training. I'm sorry. How are we looking on time? Is there a timekeeper? No? Perfect. All right, so I'll just keep going. All Again, this is where we'll start to repeat ourselves. I'll start to repeat myself, but your policies need to be clear, simple language, complete, no gap, and consistent as well. And this is where the SDRCC can help you on that. As I mentioned, we do review on policy drafting. So if you ever need our help, we'd be glad to help you to the best of our capacity. French. I'm sorry. Okay, so it's okay to have well-written policies, but are they communicated? You need to, whenever you implement a new thing, you need to widen the target as much as possible to every single stakeholders in your organizations, whether it be parents, athletes, coaches, especially parents if you're dealing with minors. It's very important for them to be aware of everything that's going on in your organization. There's no reasons nowadays with the internet, direct email. You can publish it on your website. And I looked at Hockey Manitoba's website, and I think it's great because there's a lot of activity, lots of resources, and so you need to communicate as much as you can with your stakeholders. I know it sounds everything I've said so far. It sounds kind of maybe complicated, or it's a hurdle, or I'll need to work a lot in order to review my policies and stuff. But the more the more effort you put into your governance structure, the easier it is afterwards for the administration of those policies, and it makes your life in the end easier because you're not dealing with people challenging decisions every now and then. And voila. And also, if there's ever a challenge of a decision, it's easier for you to deal with them because you know the proper process to do so. Also, when we talked about the training of volunteers, it's a good thing as well to let them know where they can access those policies, all your governance structure, where they can access it on your website or a private server or via email, whatever. So that they don't have to bother you every now and then when they need to consult them, and they can find them themselves on the website. Also avoids the risk of confusion. All right. Okay. Fourth cause of disputes, we're getting to the end. All right, so we talked about board members, Mr. and Mrs. Roberts. Now, let's say we have we just had our annual general meeting, and we brought 4 new people on board. People are very energetic. They're keen to help the organization. And that AGM happens around May, and then we break for the summer, and the next meeting is going to be in September. So during the summer, one of the newly elected board members, she's very energetic. She's a businesswoman, knows a lot of people in the community, goes out on her own and signs a bunch of sponsorships for the upcoming season. Then the next meeting in September comes around, and you gather around, and then she's super happy to say, oh, I brought $150,000 worth of sponsorships for the organization. Wow, that's tremendous, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, she didn't have the right to go out and seek out sponsorship. The president is very angry at her because, according to the bylaws, he's the only one with the finance director to be able to go out and seek sponsorships. In addition of that, most of the sponsorships that she found during the summer are in contradiction with exclusive agreements that the club already has with other members of the community. Let's say she signed Reebok, and you have a specific agreement with Nike. So Nike is probably not going to be happy that Reebok is sponsoring you as well. So she was, in the end, ultimately, she was super mad because although all her work was for nothing in the end, because since she got on board, she didn't know exactly her role and the limit of her role and responsibilities. She was without the proper authority or competence to go out and seek those sponsorships. All right. Again, it goes back to say that decisions need to be compliant with your rules and your policies. You need to have the right people to make the right decision. In this case, although the board member was super energetic, it was for nothing. And make sure people with authority, they know their limits, right? So maybe, for instance, in your governance structure, the coach cannot be the only one making a decision to discipline one of their kids. Maybe it has to be to a higher authority. So it's very important for people to know what their limits are and what's expected of them. And let's say if you're for code of conduct per se, it's in your codes of conducts. You may have one that's general for all the stakeholders of your organization. Then you can divide that code of conduct to specific members of your organization. Let's say you can have specific expected behaviors for coaches, for athletes, for parents as well, and maybe volunteers in your organization. So it's important for everyone to understand and know what the expected behavior is from them, and what's the limit of their role and responsibility. It's important also to match the volunteers and staff to specific positions, right? If we take the example that I just said for this case, maybe that board member who went out and seek sponsorships, maybe she should have been the finance director. Maybe she should have had more training regarding the bylaws and stuff like that. Maybe since she's a businesswoman, she knows a lot of people in the community, she's the best suited person to manage the finances of your organization. So how many of you here have realized that in some annual general meetings, it's usually a popularity contest, right? The person who's the most popular, who has the most friends, probably not the people wearing Montreal Canadiens hat in this room right now, but I'm sorry, I had to do it. I'm a Jets fan. No, I'm not a. Yeah, no. Let's go Jets. Probably the Leafs are gonna have a good team this year. I'm sorry for everyone else in Canada. Where was I going to with that? I'm sorry. Yes, popularity contest, thank you very much. The person that has the most friends, not the Montreal Canadiens ones, they are elected president because everyone votes for them. And then vice president, and then blah, 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 blah. Where in other organizations, what they do is they elect board members, and then they let them decide between themselves who's the best suited person to run a meeting. Maybe that person should be president, the spokesperson. Maybe you're an accountant in your daily life, so maybe you should be the one running the finance. You're a lawyer, so maybe you should be in charge of compliance and making sure that you meet all the requirements of your provincial federation and Hockey Canada in the end. So I need to match their expertise and their skills with their time commitment. Not every single person has the exact same time to commit to your organization. So it's important for you when you bring new people in to try to match them to maximize their involvement and to maximize their impact in your organization. Adjust job descriptions as well. If you're fortunate enough to have paid staff on your team or even volunteer positions, a lot of people are willing to donate their time. But let's say just at the SDRCC, for instance, I used to be the education and communication coordinator. Although I do love writing communiques and managing the website, I'm not necessarily the best person at that. So we brought in a new person, and he had the part of partnerships, but he was not necessarily very familiar with that. But he has a communication degree, so we adjusted our job description to match our expertise and skills. Maybe if you're, let's say, a growing club, a lot of new people are coming in, maybe you need a president or a CEO or executive director that have skills towards how to grow a business or how to grow an organization. Where let's say if you're stagnating or if there's a little decrease in membership and whatnot, maybe he's not the best person for that. Maybe he won't be motivated enough. So you need to maybe have someone who has a certain set of skills that's more towards this category of things. Plan for reorganization when necessary. When you have let's say people that are leaving your organization, it's a good time to ask them to assess the situation, have some maybe exit interviews and ask them what went well, what went wrong, and why is it that you're leaving us, in order for you to have a better understanding of the situation of your organization. Although we're dealing with volunteers and stuff like that, it's just like in our regular daily job. When you get a new job, your employer doesn't just, well, most of the time, doesn't just throw you in the fire right away. You have some sort of training, onboarding. You have some time to practice your skills and learn the ropes of the organization before going out and doing your job. So it's kind of similar for volunteers as well. Human resource management, I talked about that. All right, last but not least, cause of dispute. All right, so we've talked about conflict of interest. We've talked about perceiving an injustice, feeling wrongfully sanctioned by a policy or whatnot. People not having the proper authority and whatever. But what about the consistency of our decision making? We'll take for example, there is your club goes to yearly to the Western Regional Championship. Every year you go, and it's the biggest event of the year for your club, and your kids are super happy to go. But let's say one of your you deal with host families there. People host the kids. You don't go to an athlete village or to people go to. You have host families that welcome you in their community. And one of the kids was caught drinking. Parents had a dinner and there was a bottle of wine open, and you have 14-year-olds that go to that tournament. And at the end, when the parents went to bed, the kids they got up and then they drank a sip of wine, but then the parent got up to go to the bathroom, and he caught them. So calls the coach and saying, well, one of your athletes drank wine. What should I do? Blah blah blah. Then the next morning, your coach gathers with other representatives of your organization, and you decide to you bring in the kid with a representative, and you decide to impose to the kid that he needs to write a letter of apology because he drank wine the night before. One of the parents who's in the room right now raises her hands and says, well, 3 years ago, my daughter was at the exact same championship in the exact same club, and she was caught smoking, and you expelled her from the tournament, right? What does that tell us? So there was a breach of the code of conduct. It's probably stated in your code that your kids are not allowed to drink and smoke during tournaments or period. So the sanction for a breach of the code of conduct was not the same 3 years afterwards, right? She was expelled. He only got to write an apology letter. So what does that tell us? Decision making is inconsistent over time. So how do you cope with decisions? How do you make sure also that decisions are consistent within your organization? You need to have a transition process and knowledge transfer as well. That's another, maybe another step for you to say, oh no, we need to do that in our organization. But it's fairly easy to do, to have a succession plan. So let's say you're renewing your board of directors. Maybe you want to have, let's say, staggering mandates. So people that will you renew half of your board every 2 years, and the other half 2 years afterwards, so that there's a transition of knowledge. Maybe you want to have a president-elect with the existing president staying on board for another period of 6 months in order to train him or her to be able to fully understand and apply his role and his responsibilities as the president. So allow overlapping of mandates for better transition. And it also goes to, let's say, well-kept minute books. How many of you take minutes during board meetings or just any kind of discipline or appeal? It is important for you in order to have this organizational memory, in this type of situation, what did we do? What was the process that was followed? What was the sanction that we applied? Minute books used to be in the president's basement in a filing cabinet, and it sat there for 20 years. But nowadays, with internet, as I mentioned in the beginning, there's no reason for people not to keep those records and to share them, to transmit them from, let's say, one administration to the other. Same thing can go for coaches. If you're every time you're doing a selection process, you may want to write some sort of notes and minutes that you can transfer to your the following coach if you're leaving your position and whatnot. And it basically goes back again to HR and mentoring, right? When you do your onboarding, people need to know where they can access the minute books of the organization, and in order for them to go back on them if they want to know how to apply a certain set of rules. Maybe in the case that I mentioned, in the example that I used, people would have gone back in the other discipline committees that happened at the exact same championship and realized that we expelled the person because she smoked. Maybe that's the sanction that would have been imposed. Maybe in this case, when I talked about the fact that decisions must be on facts and circumstances and not just on hearsay, I think it's the correct word. It's because if you go back in your minute book and you realize that 3 years ago, the person who was caught smoking, she had fake IDs and she went to the corner store and she bought smokes and then she smoked, so it was premeditated, right? So she took all the steps necessary to go and buy smokes in order to smoke. Whereas in this instance, the kid that was caught drinking, it was only a crime of opportunity, right? The bottle of wine was there. I'm 14-year-old. I'm a bit rebellious. I wanted to have a sip of drink. So that's more of a crime of opportunity. So does the sanction need to be the same? Well, you need to factor in the facts and circumstances of each case as well. But the minute books helps you to have some sort of consistency over time in your decision-making process. So I talked about that. Again. All right, so I think that's pretty much it. I think we're just about an hour. So do you have any questions from the presentation that I just did? The main cause of disputes, does that ring a bell? Does it sound familiar? Is that something that you could apply in your organizations? Maybe some of it? Yes? All right. Also, to let you know that the SDRCC has tons of resources on governance. If you're looking to implement new policies and rules, we have model policies on our website. I can share the link with you afterwards if you want. And you need to adapt them to your reality, not just adopt them. It's important to make the difference. But we have model policies that can be useful for your organizations too. All right. Well, thank you very much for your attention. It was the first session of the morning. We'll see each other in the afternoon, and I'll now leave the floor back to Peter. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephane. That was some excellent information there, and certainly planted the seed for a lot of us to how we deal with a lot of dispute resolutions, which is a prominent part of our game, unfortunately. And I think there's a lot of information there, and certainly visiting your website will be the opportunity for people to collect further information. We're just going to take a short break here. We'll be back in 10 minutes, so starting at 8:45. So if everyone will be back and ready to go then. And I have a gift here for Stephane, and he ran off, so I guess, does anyone interested? Anyone? Okay, thanks very much.